When Queen Zenobia got crushed outside Antioch in 272 CE, her generals probably thought, that's it, we're dead, because that's usually how this story ends, right? But Rome didn't always kill you. Sometimes they did something way worse. They had this terrifying talent for turning defeated rulers into walking warnings, not just beaten, but publicly dismantled. And for queens, it wasn't just about conquest, it was about humiliation on a level that was almost surgical. Rome wanted the world to see that even a woman who once ruled armies could be stripped down to nothing. Because in Rome's eyes, the moment you lost, you weren't royalty anymore. You were property. And the second you became a captive, your crown didn't protect you. It actually made you a bigger trophy. The Romans had laws specifically built to erase your status, parades designed to showcase your downfall, and prisons waiting at the end of the street like a final punchline. And here's the part that'll make your stomach turn. Some queens didn't even make it to execution, because Rome had other ways of breaking you first. Thinking the same thing, okay, we're about to get executed, because that's what most empires do when they catch a rebel ruler. But Rome played a much colder game, because the second a queen got captured, Roman law basically erased her identity. It didn't matter if you were born into royalty, wore a crown, commanded armies, or ruled an entire empire. Under Roman law, defeat flipped a switch. You went from queen of the East to spoils of war. They had this concept called ius gentium, the so-called law of nations, and it basically said, if you lose a war against Rome, you lose everything. Your freedom, your rights, your dignity, gone, instantly. And the terrifying part is, Roman citizens had legal protections. Like, if you were Roman, you couldn't just be whipped in public like an animal. You couldn't just be executed without trial. That would cause outrage. But if you weren't Roman, you had no shield, no rights, no mercy guaranteed. A captured queen legally ranked no higher than the lowest soldier in chains. Rome didn't care about bloodlines. Rome cared about one thing: power. And once you lost, they made sure you understood you were now beneath them. And for women, it got even darker, because Roman military culture didn't just treat female captives like prisoners, they treated them like prizes. And this is where the story starts getting absolutely brutal, because once Rome had you in chains, the nightmare wasn't over. In a lot of cases, it was just beginning. Because Rome had this thing called the triumph, and on paper it sounds like some grand celebration, like a victory parade. But in reality, it was basically Rome turning conquest into entertainment. And the most important part of that entertainment wasn't the soldiers, it was the prisoners. If a Roman general got Senate approval to hold a triumph, they didn't just march through the city waving flags, they staged a full-on psychological assault. The route stretched nearly 4 kilometers, winding through the most crowded streets of Rome, cutting through the Forum, and ending at the Capitoline Hill. And it was designed like a movie. First came musicians and performers, loud and chaotic, setting the mood like it was a festival. Then came wagons carrying paintings and models of conquered cities, basically a giant flex, showing everyone what Rome had destroyed. Then came exotic animals dragged in chains, lions, strange beasts from faraway lands, things most Romans had never seen before. The message was obvious. Rome doesn't just conquer people, Rome conquers the world. But then came the part everyone waited for, the prisoners. And at the front of the prisoner column, walking slowly in shackles, were the defeated rulers, kings, generals, and sometimes queens. And here's the detail that makes it so cruel. Rome often left them dressed in their royal clothing, not out of respect, but because it made the humiliation hit harder. Imagine that.
You're wearing your crown, your robes, your jewelry, but you're chained like an animal, forced to shuffle through streets packed with cheering Romans. That contrast was intentional. Rome wanted the crowd to look at you and think, if she can fall, anyone can. The whole city became a stage, and the queen became the main character in the most degrading performance imaginable. Thousands of people staring, laughing, jeering, pointing. And the procession wasn't quick. It could take the entire day, hours and hours of slow marching while your legs burned, your pride collapsed, and your future stayed uncertain. Because here's the terrifying part. Some prisoners survived the triumph. Some didn't even make it to nightfall. And that uncertainty, that was part of the torture. And this is where Zenobia comes back in, because her triumph wasn't just humiliating, it was legendary. Alright, so let's talk about Zenobia, because her story is one of the most brutal examples of how Rome handled a queen who dared to challenge them. This wasn't some minor rebellion. Zenobia built a real empire. Palmyra wasn't just a desert city, it became the center of a massive power base. Under her rule, her influence stretched from Egypt all the way up into Anatolia, and she openly challenged Roman control of the eastern provinces. For Rome, that wasn't just annoying, that was unacceptable. So when Emperor Aurelian finally crushed her forces in 272 CE and captured her while she was trying to flee toward Persia, he didn't just capture an enemy, he captured a symbol. And in Rome, symbols mattered almost as much as victory itself. Aurelian knew exactly what he had, a queen who had humiliated Rome by holding territory they believed belonged to them. She was the perfect centerpiece for his triumph, and when the triumph finally happened in 274 CE, Rome turned Zenobia into a living billboard for imperial dominance. The Historia Augusta describes the scene, and even though ancient sources can exaggerate, the details line up with what Rome loved doing, making the display as dramatic as possible. Zenobia was covered in jewels, glittering in the sunlight like some kind of walking treasure chest. She wasn't dressed down, she wasn't hidden. No, Rome wanted everyone to see her in full royal glory. But then came the part that made the crowd gasp. The chains. Zenobia wasn't bound in simple iron shackles like an ordinary prisoner. She was marched through Rome in massive golden chains, so heavy that guards had to walk beside her to help support them. And that detail is so messed up because it wasn't random. Gold wasn't chosen because Rome wanted her to look fancy. Gold was chosen because it was psychological warfare. It was Rome saying, all the wealth you controlled, it belongs to us now. Your riches aren't your power anymore. They're your prison. Zenobia became a moving monument of defeat, wrapped in luxury that had been turned into humiliation. And yet, what's wild is that ancient sources say she stayed composed. She didn't collapse, she didn't scream, she didn't beg. She walked hours through hostile crowds, chained like a trophy, and still carried herself like a queen. And that might be exactly why she didn't die, because Aurelian could have executed her. That's what usually happened to captured rulers, but instead, he spared her. And at first, that sounds like mercy, until you realize what Rome was really doing, because keeping her alive meant she could serve as something even more useful than a corpse, a living reminder. And the next part gets even darker, because Zenobia wasn't the only queen Rome humiliated. Boudica's story takes this cruelty to an entirely different level. So Zenobia at least survived her humiliation, but Boudica's story is the kind of thing that makes you realize Rome wasn't just conquering land, they were conquering people's souls.
Because what happened to her wasn't just political punishment, it was personal destruction. Back in 60 CE, the king of the Iceni, Prasutagus, died, and he tried to do what a lot of rulers did when Rome hovered nearby. He tried to compromise. He left a will that basically said, all right, Rome gets half, my daughters get half. His thinking was probably, if I give Rome something, they'll leave my family alone. But Rome didn't play fair. Roman officials looked at that will and basically laughed. They ignored it completely. They seized the entire kingdom, grabbed the wealth,
took the land and treated the Iceni like conquered property. And when Boudica protested, Rome decided to make an example out of her. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, publicly. According to Tacitus, the Roman procurator Decianus Cottus ordered Boudica to be flogged in front of her people. And that alone was a statement, because flogging wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. It was Rome saying, "You are not a queen. You are not even human in our eyes." But then, it got worse. Tacitus records that Boudica's daughters were violated by Roman soldiers, and the way Tacitus writes it is chilling, because he doesn't dramatize it, he doesn't sensationalize it, he just states it like a fact, almost like even he, a Roman historian, couldn't fully process how brutal it was. Because this wasn't random violence, this was deliberate. Rome wanted Boudica broken, they wanted her daughters shamed, and they wanted the Iceni to watch and understand exactly what resisting Rome would cost them. It was terror as policy, and the public nature of it mattered. This wasn't something done in the shadows. It was meant to echo through the entire kingdom like a warning. Your royal blood means nothing. Your crown means nothing. Your family means nothing. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Rome thought this would crush Boudica. Instead, it lit a fuse. Because if you humiliate a queen in front of her people, you don't always create fear. Sometimes you create rage, and what happened next nearly wiped Rome out of Britain entirely. So, Rome thought they had Boudica handled. They figured we humiliate her daughters, and the Iceni will fall in line. That was the plan. But instead of breaking her, they created something way more dangerous. Because Boudica didn't just get angry, she became unstoppable. After the flogging, after what happened to her daughters, she wasn't thinking like a politician anymore. She wasn't trying to negotiate. She wasn't trying to preserve her late husband's kingdom. She was thinking like someone who had nothing left to lose. And that is the kind of person Rome should have feared the most. Boudica rallied the Iceni and other tribes who were already sick of Roman control. People who'd been taxed, bullied, robbed, and treated like dirt for years. And when they saw what Rome did to their queen, it was like the entire region snapped. Tacitus even preserves a speech he claims Boudica gave, and whether it's word for word accurate or not, the message is crystal clear. She basically tells them, "I'm not fighting because I want to be queen again. I'm fighting because I'm a woman who was violated and humiliated, and because my daughters were destroyed." That's not politics, that's vengeance. And the rebellion that followed was pure chaos. Boudica's forces swept through Roman settlements like a wildfire. They destroyed 3 major Roman cities, including Londinium, what we now know as London, and the death toll was horrifying. Tens of thousands of Romans and Roman allies were slaughtered, and for a moment, Rome genuinely panicked, because Britain wasn't supposed to be difficult. It was supposed to be a profitable province, a place Rome could dominate with a few legions and some intimidation. But suddenly, an entire region was in open revolt, and the face of that revolt was a furious queen who had turned humiliation into war. Imagine being a Roman soldier at that time. You're stationed in Britain thinking it's just another assignment, and then out of nowhere, entire cities are burning. The empire looked weak, and Rome hated nothing more than looking weak. But eventually, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus regrouped. He chose his battlefield carefully. He forced Boudica's much larger army into a position where numbers didn't matter as much. And in the final clash, Roman discipline beat British fury. The rebellion was crushed. And then, Boudica vanished from history.
Tacitus claims she poisoned herself rather than be captured, because she knew what capture meant. She knew what Rome did to queens. And the fate of her daughters? It's never recorded again. After the assault, they disappear from the historical record like they were erased, which honestly might be the most haunting part of all. And now we reach the final horror, because for many defeated rulers, the triumph wasn't the end. It was just the walk toward execution. So at this point, you start realizing something terrifying about Rome. The triumph wasn't just a parade, it was a countdown.
Because while the crowds were cheering, while the victorious general was soaking up glory, the prisoners marching in chains were walking through the streets knowing there was a real chance this was their final day on earth. They didn't always know which ending they were getting. Some captives would be spared, others would be executed the moment the parade ended. That uncertainty was part of Rome's cruelty. It forced prisoners to spend every step wondering, am I about to die today? And for many of Rome's most famous enemies, the answer was yes. Once the triumph reached the Capitoline Hill, the celebration continued with sacrifices and ceremonies. But not everyone went up the hill. Some prisoners were pulled away, quietly, dragged off like trash. And that's when they were taken to one of the most dreaded places in Rome, the Mamertine prison, also called the Tullianum. This wasn't some normal prison where people waited out sentences. This was the empire's basement, a place built for one purpose, ending enemies. It had 2 levels. The upper chamber was bad enough, but the lower dungeon was the real nightmare. It was underground, damp, filthy, and accessed through a hole in the ceiling. Prisoners were literally lowered down like cargo, and once someone went down there, most never came back out. Some were suffocated, some were left to starve, some were simply abandoned until death did the work for them. And Rome didn't even do it publicly. That's what makes it even colder. The triumph was public humiliation, but the execution was hidden. While the crowd celebrated above, the prisoner was dying below. And history gives us brutal examples. Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader who fought Julius Caesar, was held captive for 6 years, 6 years, just so Caesar could parade him through Rome like a broken animal before killing him. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, was thrown into the Tullianum and left to starve. Ancient sources say he went insane with terror, slowly dying over days. And then there was Simon Bar Giora, one of the leaders of the Jewish revolt. He was marched in Titus's triumph and then executed right after, like it was the final act of the show. In fact, according to Josephus, the triumphal ceremonies didn't even fully end until Rome got confirmation the execution had been carried out. That's how ritualized it was. Like the death of the captive ruler was the final stamp on the victory. And here's what all of this tells you. Rome didn't just conquer people. Rome staged conquest. They made suffering part of the spectacle. They turned humiliation into a public lesson. And for queens, that lesson was even sharper, because their downfall wasn't just political, it was designed to erase dignity itself. And by the time the chains came off, it was usually because the person wearing them was already gone. So when you step back and look at everything Rome did to captured rulers, you realize it wasn't random cruelty. It was policy, a system. Because Rome understood something that modern people still understand today. Fear spreads faster than armies, and humiliation lasts longer than death. That's why the Romans didn't always rush to execute their enemies. Sometimes killing a queen was too quick, too clean, too merciful. Instead, they wanted her to live long enough for everyone to watch her fall. Zenobia is the perfect example. She went from ruling an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia to being marched through Rome in heavy golden chains, so massive guards had to help carry them. And it wasn't just to restrain her, it was theater. Aurelian didn't need gold to imprison her. Iron would have worked just fine. But gold made a statement. It turned her into a walking trophy, glittering under the Roman sun, screaming to the world, even the richest queen in the East belongs to Rome now. And Boudica? Her story shows the other side of Rome's strategy, the raw brutality. Because the Romans didn't just defeat her politically, they attacked her as a woman. They flogged her in public and violated her daughters, not because it was necessary, but because it was meant to destroy her spirit and terrify her people. They wanted her to be an example, but instead they created a legend. And then there were the triumphs themselves, those long, humiliating marches through Rome's streets, the jeering crowds, the shackles, the deliberate decision to keep royal clothing intact just so the humiliation hit harder.
And at the end of that parade, sometimes there was a villa and forced mercy like Zenobia got, but sometimes there was the Mamertine prison, that underground chamber where Rome's enemies disappeared into darkness, suffocated, starved, or executed while the city above continued celebrating. And what's chilling is that the Mamertine prison still stands today. The stone is still there, the walls still exist, like a physical reminder that Rome's glory was built on suffering that most people preferred not to see. So when we talk about Roman triumphs, we're not just talking about celebrations. We're talking about a machine designed to crush human beings. And queens, women who once commanded armies and ruled nations, were turned into spectacles, reduced to objects and displayed as warmings for the entire empire.